Bonjour, mes amis. It is wonderful to be here with you this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Krista Kosterman, and I am the Chief Science Officer here at the DNA Company, which really just means I get to be the Chief Nerd. And tonight we're going to nerd out a little bit, and we're going to talk about how medicine is evolving to include genes, what it's doing really well at right now, what it's not doing so well at, and how you can leverage some of, especially what we're doing really good at, to change how you're living your life, to change how you're realizing your health. Joining me this evening, I have our most illustrious Dr. Laura Varden. Welcome, Medell. How are you today?
Well, hello and good evening, everyone. And hello, Dr. Kosterman. It's such a pleasure to
Mm,
see you and to be doing another webinar with you. This
yeah,
is this
I
is one of the
agree.
joys of my day.
Likewise, Medell. Audience, I'm curious, before we give this a go, before Dr. Varden and I jump into things, I want to know who's new here, who's new to this conversation. We tend to get some, I lovingly call them frequent offenders, but I'm seeing more and more new faces within the audience. So if you're new to us, please toss a one into the chat or maybe even a name. I'd love to know who's out there this evening. And if you're one of my favorite frequent offenders, please toss a two into the chat because as always, we're delighted when you return and want to learn more with us. All right. Oh, we do have a new evening. There are a lot of new
Yay.
faces here. Yeah. Hello
And
to all the new faces. Oh, there's a lot of
yes,
names.
oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
We have a lot of
Welcome.
uh,
Mhm.
frequent offenders. Thank you
I say
so
it with
much
such
for
love. I
being
hope none
here.
of my frequent offenders get
Oh,
offended by that.
I love it. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your time with us.
Yeah. Yeah. So especially to those that are new with us, we'll make sure we walk through some of the testing, what we do, what we love here at the DNA Company, so that you understand the power behind what we do. To also ground us this evening as well, we're going to jump into the poll questions. So, audience, every time Dr. Varden and I show up, it's to the end of supporting your understanding. And so our poll questions help us do that. Vanny or Katie, if you can toss that up for us. Oh, we have a newbie as well.
I love
I
it.
love it when people are like taking it beyond. So there's quite a few new people. And welcome to you all. I wish I had updated my prescription or else I'd read out some names. Dr. Varden, if your glasses are up to spec, please feel free to call out some people.
Oh, absolutely. So actually, Constance said that claimed herself as a newbie. So welcome, Constance. And Cynthia is back again. She's saying, "Love you, ladies. We love you too. Thank you so much
Oui,
for
oui.
being here." We've got Regina is new. Jennifer is a return. Audience member. Darlene is a return.
Mm.
Sherry's a return, and she's coming from southern New Jersey on the shore. Oh, nice.
Oh,
And
yeah.
let's see, Cheryl is new. We've got Lainey, Maria,
Mm. Nice.
and
Love
we've
it.
got a lot of others who are returning, like Amy and Diane and Lynn and
Yeah.
Janet and April and Christy. There we go. And
There we go.
Bennett is new. Julie is new. Oh, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to dive into our poll questions so that we know what our new and old friends are looking to learn this evening. So, the first thing we asked you, audience, was have you taken a consumer DNA test before? And beautifully, about 50% of the audience has taken our in house. The DNA 360. And then there's some other people who have said, yes, they've taken it for ancestry. Yes, they've taken it for health insights outside of DNA 360. And then a few other people that are saying no, but they're considering it. So hopefully, especially for those that are considering, this will enlighten and give more information to that decision. The next question that we have here is, what did you learn from your DNA test? I think this is such an important question. And about 40% said a little, but not enough. So these are the people that took one of those tests and potentially even ours, and they're saying, learned a bit, but not enough. About 34% actually say they're satisfied with what they learned it changed a lot in their life. And then about 20% was saying they didn't actually take much from it. So I'm curious for those on the call that who said either a little, as in they didn't get a lot, but they got a bit, or those that didn't take much. I'm curious what testing you did, because that will help again educate us as to how we speak to why that may have happened. So if you took a test and you either got a little to no information from a health action perspective, toss into the chat what test that was. Okay. The next question that we asked here was which area of health would you like to personalize most and work on most? So we'll make sure, especially this evening, as Dr. Varden and I are exploring different examples of how we do things a bit different, how the DNA 360 might offer a bit more insight. We'll make sure we focus on this. And the biggest one I'm seeing, about 50% of the audience, is asking for longevity and aging. Okay. The next most popular thing is energy and fatigue, which I would offer probably two sides of the same coin, right, Dr. Varden?
Oh, absolutely. Got to have the energy to keep going for that longevity aspect for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. The next question that we asked is how confident are you that your current DNA data currently reflects your body's real world function? And 30% of our audience is saying very confident. They're seeing that happy mirror between the two. About half of the audience is saying somewhat confident. There's some similarities, maybe not all. And then the balance, about 10% of the audience is saying not confident. And then 13% is saying they're not really sure what that question means. And I value that. And so, audience, as Dr. Varden and I progress through this conversation, we're going to talk through how sometimes you're going to get gene readings where it doesn't feel like you and why that may or may not be. Okay. And the last question that we asked is, what are you hoping to get from this session with us today? And a majority of the audience, about 50%, are asking for actionable insights that they can use today. The next highest category is here, understanding the science behind functional genetics. So we'll make sure we dive into both of those spaces. Yeah. And when I'm looking just to the chat quickly before Dr. Varden and I jump into other things, asking that question of what are some of the testings that you did and either did not take much from or did not take a lot from, most people were saying 23andMe. I see a few people were saying DNA 360, largely byproduct. They didn't have the time to read through the reports. But I'm seeing a majority sitting here with 23andMe, if my spectacles are helping me enough. Yeah. All right. So, Dr. Varden, let's dive into this. Let's maybe start with this idea of consumer testing, right? Because so 23andMe started their practice, and this is not to rag on 23andMe. This is simply to bring a timeline to it all, right? They started what, 10, 15 years ago offering their kits. And that was a point with which, the market was a little bit dubious. People weren't entirely sure what was going to be happening, what they'd be getting back. And we saw that it became this incredible consumer good that a lot of people were sending data, their saliva in, their samples in for novelty testing, right?
Or just seeing, hey, what is sorry, not a dry spot in my throat.
Oh,
um, where do I come from? What, just I think it was the novelty of
hmm.
finding out about genetics. What is this all
Yeah.
about? What can it tell me?
Yeah.
Um, Not necessarily thinking what are the limitations or having something very specific outside of like ancestry, because a lot of people have done ancestry.com
Yeah.
not .com, ancestry
Hmm.
reports, but this being somewhat similar in a way, but very interesting with how quickly
Hmm.
the field of genome excuse me, sorry, the field of genetics and genomics has really come. But then also how much we still have yet to learn.
Yeah, yeah, because I think 23andMe set the stage to an extent, at least in people's minds, of you do genes in order to understand where your family came from. They didn't really set the stage insofar as you can leverage this in your day to day, because I think their first foray into health was along the lines of we're going to talk to you about genes in your body, in your DNA, that are associated to disease. So even their first kind of, dipping the proverbial toe into the waters of health wasn't necessarily from a wellness perspective, it was more from a disease perspective. I remember, I'll out my parents. My parents got this testing done, and I remember they called me and they're like, "Well, you're the science one, so you should open it and read it for us." And I remember opening it, and one of the first panels that you could access was saying, "We have markers that can speak to, do you have influence to breast cancer, to MS, to," it listed through a bunch of diseases. Right. And it was like, would you like to know your status? Like, I think they did it in a very respectful way. Right. It wasn't slammed up. There was choice, but it was still very much positioned as your DNA will tell you about diseases, not necessarily your DNA is going to tell you about how you can function in a way that is aligned with your DNA and offer best health.
Or
Right.
even making that information clinically relevant to be able to action. And that really is the distillation of what we do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the DNA company was very much birthed out of the idea that all of this genetic information is coming on the line. It's cool to know about your family. It's important to know about disease, but there's also so much more information that you can get from genes that can impact, as the audience wants to know, that day to day function, right? What can I do today in
mhm.
order not necessarily just to prevent a specific disease or worry about acquiring, breast cancer, MS, whatever that gene might be, but instead, how do I live in a way that's better, more harmonious with my genes and feels better?
Yeah. And I think that they're early on. I think the tide is changing now, but I think early on, when it came to genetic testing, like
Yeah.
with 23andMe, that people would take that information and look at their gene saying, oh, wow, okay. In science, it says you've got this susceptibility to have this disease. And they took it as almost diagnostic, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this disease.
Yeah.
My genes say I have it, or I am definitely going to be getting it.
Hmm.
And I think I don't I don't think that that they planned on that, or that that was,
Yeah.
um, their thought of this is the information, we're going to put it out like this. I think it just sort of transpired that way.
Hmm.
And this is where I'm saying that the tide is turning in the things that we do, where we're looking at it and saying, okay, you may have this particular susceptibility based on research, science, clinical studies, everything else, but it doesn't mean you have to get it.
Yeah.
And it's putting the empowerment back in the hands of the person and saying, hey, let's change the context. Let's take a
Hmm.
look at other aspects of your
Yeah.
genes. Let's look at your profiles. Let's look at reasons why, when you have this genetic variant that lends to a particular disease, why do
Hmm.
some people get it and others don't? Let's see
Hmm.
if we can't decode the way of lifestyle, diet, different ways of living, or support for the body.
Yeah.
So you're one of those uh, people, one of those the percentage that may have the gene but doesn't get the disease.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're raising a really important point, Dr. Varden, in that There are a lot of people walking around with genes, for example, for Alzheimer's. It's a polygenomic disease, meaning there's not just one gene responsible for it. There's many, and many people are walking around with a large portion of those, but they don't have Alzheimer's, right? Or they
So
never are diagnosed with it. And conversely, there are some people with a much smaller percentage of those genes that influence, sometimes even and very few, and yet they present quite ferociously early on, right? And so the question is, what is the difference between these people? Because we're not able really to boil it down to either one gene or even just several genes that influence disease. And this is to answer, I see Kai's question, um, you know, how is the DNA 360 test different? And this, to an extent, is the crux of our difference, right? So we don't focus on disease. We don't look at genes that say you will or will not, this does or does not add to a risk of dementia or to cancer or to whatever it might be. Instead, what we are looking at are genes that influence how your body functions on a day to day basis, and in particular, where there's a weakness in that function, what can we do about it so that you're minimizing that impact, or even, if possible, completely negating that impact? So let us draw up a few examples for you, because that sounds all high and mighty in the clouds, but we want to ground that, right? So we call it the DNA 360, from the happy little 360 degrees of a circle, because in theory, it's meant to speak to all aspects of your health. So we will examine mood and behavior, we examine cardiovascular function, we examine the ever elusive sleep, we examine diet, nutrition, and metabolism, we examine sex steroid hormones, and we examine various detox or inflammation pathways, right? And so we do this to the end of really saying, hey, Dr. Varden, based on your profile, let's see if you have a weakness towards cardiovascular. If so, what is that weakness? And most importantly, what can we do about it? Right, audience? The goal is not for you to be a nerd about genes. The goal is for you to be action oriented and empowered with, based on what your genes are, what can you do to support yourself?
Absolutely. And, that really lends to what Constance was saying about being interested in that genetic testing,
Mhm,
because they have a particular diagnoses that they want to work with, that they want to help,
mhm,
and support their bodies to not have those constant symptoms, which absolutely we work with clients like that every day. But, as you were saying, Dr. Kosterman, that it's not that we focus on that particular diagnosis or disease. We are aware of it,
mhm,
but we go toward that root cause. We go toward the functional aspect of how can we support the body in its genetic predisposition, so that way further downstream it will alleviate symptoms of that particular disease. How do we strengthen the terrain, solidify that soil, so that way you can move forward, and as you said, to hopefully even shift out of that dis-ease state where you are no longer having symptoms at all. And yes, we have had clients like that. So it doesn't mean that, it doesn't guarantee that you will shift out of a disease state, but it certainly can alleviate, symptoms and make you feel better. And, for those of you who are like, well, I'm okay, but I want to optimize, I want to feel even better. And absolutely, but it's like you said, it's finding where the weaknesses are, because
yeah.
sometimes those are harder to find.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So why don't we dive into one of the examples? So I saw within the survey that a lot of people in the audience were curious around longevity. And so, one of the bigger enablers and predictors of longevity is going to be cardiometabolic health. So, how well is your heart functioning? And how well are your metabolism? How well do you handle sugars and fats and things like that? That becomes really important. It may not be as sexy as people want it to be in terms of how do I live forever. And we're going to start with the heart and various organs that support metabolism. But I think that might be a good point to start. So, audience, if you have your test, maybe we'll dive into the DNA 360 first. Um, oops, sorry. There we go. And so, looking at this, right, there's an element of understanding first baseline risk towards cardiovascular wellness. We can look at how inflamed body might become, especially at the artery and the vein level of the body, right? And based off of that, you can then jump into just one second. I have a very excited kitty. There we go. Sorry about that, audience. I apologize. Um, right. So looking into your cardiovascular report, looking at the gene I'm talking about that influences a lot of inflammation at that vascular level is going to be 9p21. Okay, audience, that's going to be in your cardiovascular report, right? And the greater your risk towards inflammation there, that shifts a lot of health decisions. So, Dr. Varden, when you see someone with a 9p21 that isn't so great, what are one of the first points, I guess, within the cardiovascular test or outside of it that you're going to be focusing on?
Well, excuse me. For example, someone like myself, um, for the 9p21, which is actually a gene locus, we look at how many G alleles there are at various points on that gene. And so you're going to have a number. It's going to be 0 all the way to 6 with the letter G after it. So the more G's that you have, the more sensitive your endothelial lining of your cardiovascular system is. Okay. So, again, for example, I happen to have 5 Gs, which makes my cardiovascular lining very sensitive in the presence of toxins. Okay. Or different metabolites, anything that could cause, excuse me, any type of microabrasions on that cardiovascular lining. Okay. So when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the sensitivity. But then I have to think about, all right, what about those toxins that are present? Because again, if there are little to no toxins present, well, then you're not going to have as much of a susceptibility to get inflamed. Now, there's always going to be some toxins present because we do live in this world, and we have natural metabolic processes that metabolites, like estrogen metabolites, that yes, even men get, okay, have to be processed and sent through the bloodstream, to the liver, and through the regular detoxification processes, get excreted out of the body. So yes, we're always going to have some, but it doesn't mean that we can't look at other places where toxins are present that we are taking it in, namely in our environment, okay, exogenously, okay, things outside of our body. So, in that respect, I would say, yes, that's a major gene that I look at. I look at where are toxins coming from.
Mhm.
I also look at detox pathways. How good are they at actually detoxifying, breaking down, and
Mhm.
clearing toxins that they do take in? Because they really go hand in hand. And that's why you will see the detoxification pathway genes in the cardiovascular report. They are mentioned there. You will find them also very specifically highlighted in the anti-inflammatory
Yeah.
profile reports. So you'll actually see there are a few that are focused on, which is methylation, glutathionization, antioxidation, and the vitamin D pathway, because those are
Mhm.
all very important in there. So those are things that I look at. And it really is a matter of focusing on mitigating toxic exposures.
Mhm.
Okay. So that is something that you can do today. Because I'll tell you, I've never, never yet seen anyone with a perfect,
Yeah.
detoxification pathway genes, that are, stellar, with a 0G, 9P21, and everything else.
Mm.
So everyone is going to have some sort of issue, with something in their cardiovascular profile, or detoxification pathways that they could use support and do some mitigation. It's just, how sensitive are you? How much are those
Mhm.
toxins impacting you?
Yeah.
So find out
Yeah.
what you're being exposed to.
Yeah. And I think I love that you explored something that isn't always explored well when it comes to cardiovascular wellness, right? This consideration that our arteries and veins are a highway for everything going through the body, right? The good stuff being the food and the immune products, the bad stuff kind of being, the trash that the body naturally needs to take out. And so I value that you brought that into the conversation. And I think that, knowing that one marker, right? It's a location within the gene. Knowing that also educates, especially if you have other risk genes within your cardiovascular profile, how serious to be taking them, right? Like, I don't mean that to say you should ever dismiss your cardiovascular wellness, but this really helps fine tune. Do I need to be concerned about environmental burden? Because I don't have great detox pathways and I know I'm sensitive to that inflammation. Or it may refine that picture to I actually have decent detox pathways, but I'm really susceptible to hypertension. I'm really susceptible to high blood pressure. And we know that one of the ways to stress the arteries and veins, and one of the ways to really set the stage for inflammation to further encourage it, is that high blood pressure. So perhaps then the conversation shifts from detoxification for you and your cardiovascular wellness to how do I keep my blood pressure low? Right?
Mhm.
So I would offer that the the magic sometimes within genes, sometimes within reports, is going to be that individualization. It's one thing to say, work on your cardiovascular wellness. It's another thing to be able to look into your genes and know very specifically how and what to be doing there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Dr. Varden, did you have another example, perhaps before we transition more into how you take some of this data and make it into action?
Uh, do you want me to stick with cardiovascular, or do you want me to jump over to
I apologize.
another
I did go a
area?
little bit off script. Yeah,
It's
whatever.
okay.
Yeah,
No, but I'm asking, would you like me to give some other? I mean, you were
yeah.
saying about cardiovascular with the fact that, oh, hey, I do have pretty decent, detoxification pathways. I mean, yes, there's always ways to support it, okay, which
Mhm.
we should be doing anyway through, good foods to provide us the vitamins and the amino acids we need just for normal functioning. Okay, we have to have those, even if you
Mhm.
stellar genes in that respect. They still need these cofactors, which come from the foods. Okay, but say you're a cardiovascular system, you are more susceptible to inflammation. Okay, and your ApoE may not be so great, or say the ACE gene is not so great, or you're the lipid metabolism and you tend to have higher LDL cholesterol. Okay, and I am, speaking about myself, so I'm an example of this. Like I said, I
Yeah.
have 5G of my 9P21. Okay.
Yeah.
I previously had higher cholesterol and LDL, even though I what ate what I thought was a pretty healthy diet. Okay. But it just wasn't enough because of these issues with my genes. Okay, because my NOS3 and ACE were slightly off, and vasodilation, not the best. So the thing that can help, um, first of all, understanding the fact of how cholesterol works as an inflammation management tool when you do get microabrasions on the endothelial lining of your cardiovascular system. If you are more uh, susceptible, more sensitive, to toxins, to those microabrasions, well, cholesterol is used as that, inflammation management tool. And cholesterol cannot move through the bloodstream by itself. It has to be taxied. Well, what are the taxis? LDL cholesterols, HDL cholesterols, okay? These proteins actually taxi the cholesterol to the place that it's needed. So if you have a lot of inflammation, guess what? You're going to need more cholesterol. And guess what? You're going to need more taxis to bring that cholesterol to the places. So therefore, your levels are going to be a bit higher. So what can you do about that? Well, first of all, knowing where to target, like I was
Mm,
talking about my genetics. One, I've already talked about lowering toxic load. So, but that also talks about the food that you eat, okay? But also supportive measures, okay? So, increasing omega 3s, helping to lower cholesterol and LDLs, making sure that I have certain foods that help to support good response for my diet. I'm not eating a lot of sugars. I'm not having a lot of foods that, would cause my body inflammation. Of course, also having a gut test helped too, doing like our Gut 360 premium, because that played a very
mhm.
important part of educating how my immune system was reacting and how toxins were being processed in my body. But other things, trying lowering stress. Stress
Mm,
also increases that inflammatory response, which affects the heart. As I think,
yeah.
I'm hoping that you guys are seeing is that this is all connected. This is a systems biology.
Mhm.
We're not just sticking to the heart and the arteries because there are so many other different aspects that affect the health of
Yeah.
that. And that's the beautiful thing about our DNA 360 is that we are looking at these profiles, these constellations that are truly connected that affect one another, that
Yeah.
can play a factor
Yeah.
into that downstream effect of being able to lower your cholesterol, to lower your inflammation, which I have done. I am now in, a good range by lowering my stress, using different techniques like breathing techniques and, grounding, going outside barefoot and using
Mhm.
grounding sheets and things like that.
Yeah.
Doing humming and other vagal tone, the vagus nerve to get my parasympathetic nervous system activated, that rest and
Yeah.
digest, making sure my sleep is good, and there again, looking at genes that can help
Yeah.
me do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think wonderfully, Dr. Varden, what you've kind of started to tease out for the audience is that very rarely would we say that in our health do singular genes work alone, right? You have to take a gene as part of a larger tapestry as opposed to the singular thread, right? Because that really does influence how you go about implementing this within your day-to-day health, right? If you,
right,
for example, don't have that favorable cardiovascular profile, and your other profiles are relatively favorable, except for maybe mood and behavior, to your point. Maybe it's stress that is going to be that Achilles heel to your cardiovascular system. And so looking at your mood and behavior report, looking at how you manage stress becomes all the more
right,
important. And so some of the legwork that we've done within the reports is not taking every gene by itself. We'll present every gene that we look at, but sometimes we'll also look at them algorithmically to say, hey, based on this combination of genes, it predisposes you towards this sort of tendency. And if that is you, here are some things that you can be doing about it. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think what I'd love to start talking about with you, Dr. Varden, is that there's a lot of people on this call. I think about 50% when we started the call who said they've taken tests like this. Maybe they've even taken our test. And yet there's a bit of a gap between how do we actually take that test and then bring it into action, right? Right. And
Yeah,
so let's have that conversation. Why some of this testing, in spite of being incredibly available, right, through the 23andMe's, through the ancestries, through companies like ours, right? A lot of this testing is available and it's not necessarily translating into the clinic space, right?
right. Well, I mean, again, a lot of it is focused on disease,
Mm-hmm.
diagnostics, but not, I mean, genetics. Very rarely are they necessarily diagnostic. When we're talking about chronic diseases or anything like that, very specifically, yes, there are genes that can help with diagnoses, but we don't deal with that. That is not, that's very small in the percentage that actually do that. What we're really doing is looking at the foundations. And, there was a wonderful question that works into this where Judy was asking if you improve your terrain, can it help with, for example, parasite elimination or setting up the immune system to keep parasites away? Well, yeah, it can, because the thing is that it's understanding what in your terrain. This is where the DNA comes in. What in your terrain specifically needs a little extra help? For example, if you look in your diet nutrition reports, okay, there are areas for the micronutrients. Okay, so we're talking about specifically like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, vitamin A. Here are some very important nutrients that are cofactors in several different reactions in the body and ways to help with the immune system, to help with numerous processes. Okay. If your body is not able to convert, transport, and absorb those nutrients that you're taking in very well, what do? Here's a weakness, but how would you know? So, in those types of instances, that awareness can help you understand, oh, hey, my BCMO1 gene, which is beta carotene monooxygenase, I am dysregulated. First of all, what is that gene and what does it do? Beta carotene monooxygenase. This gene it takes beta carotene, which is vitamin A, in the form that plants provide. Okay, and it converts it into retinol, the form of vitamin A that we can actually utilize. Okay, and some genes, or in some cases, people with a G allele or a GG presentation, they're not converting the beta carotene into retinol very well. Vitamin A is very important. And so it's just like, okay, so what do I do? Well, what you do with that awareness is that realize you're not going to be getting it from eating a bunch of carrots. Okay, you're going to have to get it in another form, namely in a form, an animal form that's already converted it for you. So cod liver oil is a wonderful natural food high in vitamin A, or doing something that supplement, to make sure that your body is getting that very important micronutrient. So these are the types of things to help strengthen that terrain, help give your body what it needs to do many, many, many other processes downstream. Okay. That's the type of clinically relevant, important,
Yeah.
foundational advice, that you can do today, all right, to help issues downstream,
Yeah.
that your medical doctor is not going to be providing you because it's outside of their scope, outside
Right.
of what they do.
Yeah. 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 And I think you're hitting the nail on the head there with that example of it's not that doctors don't care, it's that the system has not currently been set up for them to counsel on the preventative side of it. Their role, by and large, is to receive you when you have a boo boo and to help you fix that boo boo, right? Genes that deal with cardiovascular risk, that deal with, are you someone that focuses really well under pressure, or are you someone who does not focus well under pressure?
Mhm. Yeah.
Are you someone that creates a lot of estrogen and can clean it up really well, or creates a lot of estrogen and can't clean it up really well? That's not really relevant when you have a boo boo. And the system has been set up for boo boos, right?
Mhm.
So
And they're
looking,
very good at
and they're
it. You
great
know?
at it, right? None of this is to say they're doing a bad job or 23andMe even was doing a bad job. This is to say this is the evolution right now that is taking place, current tense, in medicine. We're shifting away from ideas of disease into ideas of disease and ideas of being very general. And when I say general, I mean if you're trying to work on cardiovascular health, the general advice would be exercise and eat well. Whereas now the more precise advice is going to be, hey, you run the risk of inflammation. You actually don't detox well. So let's focus on that. Or maybe the precision is you run the risk of cardiovascular unwellness. You risk for high blood pressure. So let's work on that,
Mhm.
right? Whatever that fine tuning is, that is where medicine is going. And that is where our tests are starting to bring us that better point of precision, taking a very general thing that, unfortunately, based on the way the system by and large has been set up, is not great at supporting, and then helping people do that on their own as well as with their healthcare providers, right?
And I'm glad that you had said about the testing, okay? Because it really is more than just knowing your genetics. That's
Mm-hmm.
one part. Very important. You have to know what you're working with at that blueprint
Yeah.
level, okay? But it doesn't necessarily mean that is what those genes are expressing in that way, which I definitely think lends to the comments that I forgot the exact percentage of people who said, hey, you know, what my genes were saying and what's actually happening, what I'm seeing doesn't seem to align. Well, this is part of the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, you have your genes, but they express in a certain way based on incoming information,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that it's receiving through diet, lifestyle, stress levels, sleep or lack thereof, etc., toxic load, all of these different things. Your genes are getting information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They are receiving, whether it be hormones or, like I said, the micronutrients or things like that, that are triggering information that goes into the cell, into the nucleus, that
Mm-hmm.
then tell the genes express in such a way, express
Mm-hmm.
a lot, express a little, don't express at all. Okay. this is
Yeah.
this is really important, the way
Mm-hmm.
that it works. I mean, it is so beautiful. I loved my classes in molecular genetics in grad school. I mean, it was just absolutely fascinating, uh, because it was almost like a domino effect. And the way that when one thing happened, it caused another reaction, it caused another reaction, and
Mm-hmm.
it made something happen.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and the important thing is that, okay, so you've got the genes. How are they expressing? Well, just knowing your genes isn't going to tell you that. This is where the other tests come in. This is why I'm glad that you said that. This is why the other tests that we have, like the DNAging premium that talks about your longevity and biological aging as compared to chronological, like how many years I've actually been on this earth around the sun, as compared
Mm-hmm.
to how are my
Right.
cells aging, okay? And that works
Mhm.
into DNA methylation or DNA silencing, like I was talking about. Um, we also have our gut 360 premium, your gut microbiome, okay? Your enteric system is like your second brain, very strongly connected to your actual brain, okay? Gut brain connection.
Mhm.
All right. And not to mention, your gut really is strongly impacting your immune system. So, with this, along with other tests that we have, we can actually take a look and see how are your genes expressing to say, what does it look like right now?
Mhm.
So that way, when you do start implementing changes, when you do start taking supplements, changing your diet, getting better sleep, doing all the wonderful things to make you healthier, to shift outside of a disease state, that you can actually measure it objectively, saying, hey,
Yeah.
I did move that needle. Yes,
Yeah.
am feeling better. Or no, maybe I'm not feeling so much better. But
Yeah.
you need to have where are you starting, so you
Yeah.
know where you're going, and
Yeah.
that's a great measurement. There's got to be that that interaction, that working together and looking at these different tests.
Yeah. I think one of the tricky points that we're at in medicine, especially as we start to, and the audience is a case in point of this, as we start to chase longevity and more, I think, more topically wellness, right? Of the years that we do have, how do we feel the best we can in our body and in our minds, right? Currently, the medical system isn't really all that well set up to track how are you doing in that longevity, in that wellness, in that lifespan, health span sense. It's not to knock the system at all, right? The system, again, was set up to measure disease, but now we're looking at a shift. And so I think it's really neat that we can bring in, especially based on technology, right? Based on the capacity to look at a lot of data, we're now able to look at different parameters of health. So, for example, with the DNA Gut 360 Premium, that is 1,000,000% accredited to advancement in technology. It's able to take a little bit of your stool, a little bit of your poop, look at all the viruses, the bacteria, the parasites, etc., that are in there, and then do incredible analysis, pattern analysis that humans can't do, to say right now you have a biome that predisposes you towards cardiometabolic issues, predisposes you towards skin issues, predisposes you towards cognitive issues or depression, right? It's really neat that we can look into that. And that's kind of a more real time measurement of what's going on in the body, so that you can again jump back to your DNA and say, cool, if right now I have a biome maybe that's pushing me a little bit towards depression and I'm starting to feel that, what's up in my genes? What can I do with a provider to change, to shift this, right? So that I don't have that pattern within the gut that supports that, right? All of this is looking towards the end of wellness and getting more and more exacting, more and more precise as to how we get there. With the de-aging premium, what we're looking at, and this is cool. I think Dr. Varden expressed this really well, is we're looking at the story that is atop the DNA, right? DNA, our DNA, right, is lives every day with us. It carries stories, and methylation are one of the ways. There's many ways, but one of the ways that that story is recorded, and that story will change what is expressed, right? And so knowing what the story, that methylation layer is atop your DNA, really speaks to, is that story one of aging right now? Is your DNA tired because you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not doing the things well? And then exactly what are you not doing well? What is worse and most weared on the body? That also becomes an important next question, because it's cool to know that you're aging quicker. It's more important to know what system of the body is contributing most to that aging, and then what do you do about it? And these sort of tests help with that, right? I think when we talk about this larger idea of going beyond 23andMe, going into future medicine, it's truly this applied precision, right? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, I do want to mention, because I've seen questions in the chat, but they're
Mm.
not in the question and answer. So if you've asked a question in the chat and have not moved it over to the question and answer, please do so, because there's some good
Yeah.
questions and we want to make sure to get those
Yeah.
answered. So please use the
Yeah.
Q&A.
Yeah. Dr. Varn, why don't we use that as a happy little transition over to Q&A?
Sounds
Yeah.
wonderful.
All right. Let's see. Uh, Sheila has our first question. Um, yeah, Sheila, let's see. Sheila, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, but if you email us, we can help track that down for you. Okay. Sheila, I think you have our contact information. If not, Vanny or Katie is going to put it into the chat. Okay. All right. Um, let's see. Okay. So, Bennett. Oh, Lindsay, I need new glasses. Bennett, I think. We're going to have name Yahtzee. It may not be your right name, but I'm trying really hard. I think Bennett is asking, they're saying that they've had whole genome sequencing. Um, can that data, which it sounds like it's been formatted to 23andMe forms, be used for the DNA company analysis? Um, yes. So Bennett, in the chat, what we're going to be doing right now, the answer is yes, and I want to say the how of the yes. So we've created an app that you can get within your local app store, be that Apple or Android, and on that app you have the ability to upload that text file. And I'm glad you were specific. It does need to be in the 23andMe format. Right now, that's the only external data that we're able to accept into the app outside of our own data. And when you do upload it into the app, we are able to offer our insight and offer our analysis onto what they've done. So a lot of this, more functional interpretation of different SNPs, as well as some of that networked, right? Multiple SNPs being considered together, that will be some of the benefit that you can get within the app. So audience, if you have your 23andMe data, you do need that .txt file. If you have the app, it can be uploaded there and you can get insight. But audience, I do want to give you a heads up, and this may not be relevant to Bennett if you have the full genome sequencing, but 23andMe doesn't look at all of the qualities and characteristics of DNA that we do. So, for example, we look at in multiple places something called copy number variation. Really, we're looking at how many copies of a gene do you have. In other instances, we look at a different quality about how long or short a certain segment of the gene might be. And so rarely that is not captured in the 23andme.txt file. So that will blunt some of the interpretation we can do because we rely on some of those characteristics in order to generate our reports. But for what the data is there, you will be able to do that. Okay,
I'll take Barbara's question,
perfect.
because
Thank you.
I think this really, your question beautifully asks about summarizing what this webinar is all about. And she's asking, when I see the word functional, I think of the branch of medicine which looks for root causes to heal rather than providing prescriptions to change the symptoms only. I'm wondering how the DNA 360 information can provide the root causes and how to heal the patient. And that's, like I said, this is so beautiful because when someone says functional medicine looks for root causes, that's exactly the foundation of our DNA 360 report. It applies functional genomics to identify why a person's body is expressing symptoms, not just what the symptoms are. And our DNA 360 analysis really maps the genetic function across, the six interconnected, like I've already talked about, body systems, so that both the practitioner and the client can uncover root biological drivers behind chronic patterns, such as inflammation, poor detoxification, hormone imbalances, or even mood dysregulation. And we've mentioned some of the other core reports in our system, cardiovascular. We've mentioned the detoxification, which is in the anti-inflammatory profile. I've mentioned diet and nutrition. Dr. Kostman, I believe you mentioned sleep, the hormones and fitness, and then of course mood and behavior. And then we have our seventh, which is longevity, which beautifully brings in a lot of those genes through the lens of longevity, which I know is very important to many of you, based on the questionnaire at the very beginning of this webinar.
Mhm.
So when you consider that this approach, it really lets the practitioner see how and where the body's biochemistry deviates from optimal function, highlighting the job the body doesn't do well. This is really the true root cause lens rather than the symptom management. So I hope that better explains or enlightens you with how our DNA 360 can look at root causes.
Mhm. I'll take the next question from, I think it's Jeff. But just prior to that, Doug has a question in the chat section and just saying that they're not getting the translation they were expecting. Namely, they're struggling a little bit with application. And so, Jeff, if you want to reach out to CEO at thednacompany.com, I see the word help several times there, and we want to see if we can support you in that understanding. Okay, so Vanny or Katie will toss that email into the chat, and if you just want to reach out to us. Okay. Yes, so the next question I have, I believe from Jeff,
Mhm.
and they're asking how we do our DNA 360 testing. And so it is a buccal swab, meaning a cheek swab. It's not a blood, and largely because, interestingly, every cell in your body effectively has the same DNA. It's going to be different methylation patterns amongst other things. That's going to be just selecting what genes. Are going to be expressing and make that a cheek cell versus a blood cell, but we leverage cheek just because it's easier on everyone involved. Most people would prefer a cheek swab as opposed to a blood draw, and then this also enables it, especially for parents who are looking to get their kids done. Okay.
Yes, and I have worked with several pediatric clients to be able to give insight for
Mm-hmm.
their parents on, how to prevent problems and how their brain works. And so,
Yeah.
definitely something worthwhile for the little ones.
Yeah.
So, there are two questions that I can actually answer together. John is saying that he only has 3 Gs in the 9p21. And so he said, I'm assuming that means I have 3 of 5. Actually, there's 6 altogether. So you're either going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 G alleles because there are 2 chromosomes and there are 3 spots on each chromosome. So 6 in total that we're looking for G alleles. And where Desiree is saying on that 9p21, if she has 0 G, what does that mean, as far as sensitivity?
Walking
So
amongst the gods, girl.
exactly. So really, the less G's you have, so 0 is more like stainless steel arterial walls, meaning that you are not very sensitive at all. It doesn't mean you're not sensitive at all. Okay, because you could still have a high enough toxic load where it can cause some issues, but you are much less likely to get microabrasions and a higher inflammatory response with 0 G, 1 G. That's really like she said, one of the gods, as compared to those like me who has 5 Gs or someone else, 6 Gs, very, very sensitive. So John, you're right in that middle. That's like an average, having 3 Gs. So
Beautiful. All right, I will take the next question, I believe from Barb. Um, this is in reference, I think, when Dr. Varden was discussing high cholesterol and there being many avenues with which can raise cholesterol. right? Um, Inflammation, diet, there's a few others. And they're asking if that can also come from bioidentical hormones. I would offer it probably shouldn't, but it also depends on your definition of high cholesterol. And so I'd say if you're concerned about your cholesterol and you are on bioidentical hormones and you're looking for an opinion, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can set you up with someone who specializes in bioidentical hormones that can give that counsel because there's a few variables there, and so that's not a clear cut yes or no answer. All right. Dr. Varden, do you want to speak to Judy's question?
Absolutely. So Judy's asking, if you improve your terrain after learning what to do after the testing, can it help keep parasites away by chance? And that's a depends. I mean, yes, by improving your biological terrain, after testing, learning how to do that, it it does make your internal environment far less hospitable to parasites. Okay. So you wouldn't have as high of a likelihood of getting them. But we still live in this world. We still eat foods. We still come in contact with things. So you can still get parasites. And many of us do. I mean, you'd think, oh, well, we live in the US and, of course we yeah, no, you can still get parasites. But again, it really is making it less hospitable and eating foods that would naturally help that detoxification pathways that help to cleanse the body so they would not be able to establish themselves as readily or, having the concentration of which that they'd hang around as much.
Hmm. Wonderful. Thanks, Dr. Varden. Um, Madeline, I think, has our next question. And they're asking if our testing can show what genes are turned on and off at the time of the test. And Madeline, the answer is no. Right now, science is not at a point where we can be so specific to say, is your ApoE gene turned on or off? What the DNA aging premium instead does is within the genome, there's certain islands, certain points on genomes where we know we've highly correlated methylation patterns to certain health outcomes. And so, what the test actually does is it looks in an area, the methylation patterning there, and how that patterning influences outcomes of things like metabolic health, inflammatory health, immune health. There's a few others, right? And so, it gives more a I'd say more specific to an organ system, more specific to a health system as opposed to a specific gene. But that tends to be a really wonderful jumping off point, right? If you're able to say, my struggle is more pointedly with metabolism as opposed to inflammation or immunity, then you know where you're focusing at, right? So that would be my offering there. It's we don't have the ability yet to do singular genes, but more that pattern in terms of health outcomes. All right. Oh, I love John's question. Dr. Varden, do you have it or would you
Yeah.
like me to grab it?
I
Okay,
love this one
perfect.
of the methylation pathway. Okay. So the question is, in the DNA 360 test results, there are two SNPs for the MTHFR gene, and he mentions the RS IDs. Can you explain what each does and what we should consider when looking at them in combination? So both of the MTHFR genes variants, okay, and when I say gene variants, I mean that they are not the wild type optimal. They are suboptimal in some form, that they can affect how efficiently your body carries out what we call methylation, the methylation process. They are important. Now, this is something that MTHFR gene is not all of methylation. There are several genes in that pathway that we look at. But I'm just going to focus on the MTHFR for right now for this answer. So methylation is really that chemical pathway that converts folate, okay, B9, into its active form, 5-MTHF or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, so it can then donate methyl groups, okay, to whatever it is, the job that it needs to do, whether it's DNA repair, whether it's neurotransmitter production, detoxification, or even cardiovascular balance. I mean, it's very ubiquitous. It does a lot in the body. So one of the MTHFRs, and this is the one with the RSID ending in 1133. And then there's another one that ends in 1131. And so the one ending in 1133, this variant changes the amino acid. I'm not going to go there because I'm going total nerd here. Let's talk about the impact of it. So, okay, so this enzyme, when it has reduced enzymatic ability, okay, what can happen is it can lead to higher homocysteine levels. Now, homocysteine can cause inflammation in the body. Okay. And there is a blood test that you can actually measure it. So if you have problems with your MTHFR gene or your methylation pathway, you can actually check to say, how are these expressing? So that is a test that can actually say, oh, I'm not methylating very well. I'm actually following what my genes are saying. And there are ways that you can help to address that and support it. So when you have higher homocysteine levels, it can actually have obviously lower folate activity, which can influence cardiovascular, cognitive, reproductive health, all the things that I was mentioning. So when you're talking about problems with that, individuals with that variant, oftentimes they can benefit from focused methylation or B vitamins that support methylation, the form of which for these B vitamins, you really need to look at other genes in your report, your SHMT1, your MTR. Those will help determine the forms of B vitamins that would work best for you. For the MTHFR that has the 1131 ending for the RSID. Now that one, that substitutes a glutamate, which is a neurotransmitter, with alanine. And really what happens is that works more in it's a cofactor for producing dopamine, serotonin, like norepinephrine, nitric oxide, things like that. So really when you're looking at the two, the one that ends in 1133, that has a stronger effect. Okay, it's more about the homocysteine, the cardiovascular risk. Okay, where the one ending in 1131, that has a little bit milder effect, and that's more about the neurotransmitters, nitric oxide signaling. When you're looking at both together, this can be significant enough to warrant personalized nutrition, methylation support, because you want to maintain that resiliency in methylation, in detoxification, in mood regulation. That is a foundational profile pathway that you want to look at. It's one of the main ones that I look at when I'm looking at someone's report, is where do they need that support, because it is so ubiquitous to so many different aspects of your health. So, and that's usually a big question, when it comes to methylation. And we've actually done several dedicated webinars to it. Justin and I think there have been a few others that have gone in with him. So if you are interested in the methylation pathway, I highly recommend listening to those podcasts, watching those webinars, and they do a beautiful deep dive into the methylation.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Varden. All right. I think Maria has our next question. And they're saying that unfortunately they had to have their gallbladder removed. And so they're wondering how genetic insights can support that. In particular, I would imagine the nutrition and the physiology beyond. So, Maria, I would strongly encourage that you connect with one of our providers. And the reason I say this is not every removal of a gallbladder is going to be the same, as well as not every person's needs after the fact are going to be the same. But where, I'll just to offer one thought One specificity that our testing can really help with is going to be in terms of um, micronutrients. So once you don't have that gallbladder, ability to digest fats, amongst other things, might be a little bit compromised. And so we really need to be looking at certain, especially fat soluble vitamins. And so your natural capacity, independent of gallbladder, to be taking those from the gut into the body. And if you're suboptimal in those spaces, how do we support that, right? We really want to be looking at if we know that we're not going to be having the amount of digestive juices, the bile that we want to digest, how's that going to impact our access to certain nutrition? And genetically, are we suboptimal in some of those spaces where we need to be even more concerned about that? Because that can really guide some of the nutritional supplementation. And I think there's a few other areas, but I'd encourage that you connect with one of our providers so that the advice can be a little bit more specific there. Okay. Yeah. Dr. Varden, do you want to take Judy's question?
Sure. So Judy was asking about my glasses. And basically, these are actually called VivaRays. We have a beautiful partnership with VivaRays. The CEO and creator of these glasses, his name is Rudy Nassif. I've actually done, I think, 3 podcasts with him. Fantastic information on light, how different kinds of light, the frequencies, how that affects us biologically. And the reason why I wear these is because, well, I'm in the Northeast and it's dark right now. And obviously, you have to be able to see me on Zoom. So I have all of these very bright lights and the blue lights from my computer on and shining at me. Well, I don't want that disrupting my biology and negatively affecting my sleep. So I use these to help block some of those blue light frequencies. So that way I can, when I am done, I can have my melatonin be produced and I can start getting into my night routine again to not have these bright lights in my face negatively affect my sleep. And there are other, what do you call them? Like additions, that you can actually put on, later in the day and different things that you can just snap on. They're really cool. So you can just go on. Oh yeah. So that way it helps to mimic the natural light exposure that you would have if you didn't have, all of the fake light that there's a lot of scientific evidence, by the way, on how blue light and other fake lights and fluorescent lights negatively affect the body. So please take a look, listen to our podcast, to our interviews. We have snippets on our social media. And if you're interested, get some
Oh,
Viva
leave
Rays
those on.
and we
That's
do.
fun. I thought it was a fun add to the outfit. I loved it. All right. Our next question. Oh, I think you hit your mic when your glasses dropped. We
Okay.
can't hear you. There, we can hear you now. There we go.
Okay.
You're back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All set.
Okay. All right. I think it's Madeline has our next question, asking if the microbiome would change all the time. And so I would imagine this is in reference to if you get a biome test today, when you get your results in approximately 3 weeks, assuming there's no male hiccup, wouldn't your biome have changed? And interestingly, the answer is not really, at least not in a material way. The only things that would dramatically change your biome, meaning if you got a test today and one of these dramatic things happened before you got your results, this would impact, but it would be something like you got exceptionally sick and were required to have antibiotics, or you went camping and you got a parasite. Something like that will very dramatically shift the biome, but short of kind of big events like that, food poisoning, something like that, your biome will hold steady in the terms of weeks, so that nothing will change substantially enough that it would change the advice in the report that you're getting back. Okay. All right.
So I do see a few questions in here that maybe we can group together and you can answer those
Sure.
because they deal with 23andMe
Hmm.
file data. So basically, it's about um, if they can obtain the text file through 23andMe to be able to upload into our app. And Uh, well, you've already said that it can, the 23andMe information can be used to upload into the app to gather information. It's just that you wouldn't get all of the information that we provide in our DNA 360 because there are limitations to the
Mhm.
23andMe data. Would you just speak into that um, uh, very briefly, but also comment about how to obtain a text
Mhm.
file?
Yeah. So obtaining a text file, I do not recall the specifics, but Dr. Google absolutely would. There's a lot of instructions on Dr. Google or through YouTube. But what you do is you go into your user profile or user settings, and it will take a few menu clicks, which is why I encourage either a video or Dr. Google, because it will give you the step by steps. You can extract the file though. You did a test with them, they will give you the data back. So that just go through their system, go through those step by steps. And then in terms of what I have seen them not report on. So, first of all, first and foremost, they don't really report on some of the genome qualities outside of SNP information. So, audience, when I talk about a gene, kind of think about it like of one book within your bookshelf, and you have a beautiful bookshelf that details all of you. So, one gene you can consider to be one book, and when you read a book, you know that not all pages within that book are going to be considered equal. Some pages are going to have plot points. Other pages are going to be beautiful, but don't really contribute to the plot. So all the plot points that are looked at are considered SNPs, but we also know there's other characters, two books. There's chapters, there's sections. We look at chapters and sections through copy number variation, amongst a few other things, right? How many copies of the book do you have on your bookshelf? And that isn't really captured within the 23andMe data in a way that can be used. So there's going to be certain algorithms. So, for example, our detoxification algorithms, some of our mood and behavior algorithms that you won't be able to gain benefit from. But I think cardiovascularly, you're able to gain benefit. Um, for much of diet and nutrition, for some of hormones, right? So I hope that offers a bit of context. Absolutely upload your data there, and then see where it goes. I have, when we were working on creating this app, I saw a lot of 23andMe data. And one thing I will comment on is sometimes they were just missing snips or like those really important pages from the book, for no other reason than they were missing them. Right? It's done in a large manufactured way, and unfortunately, sometimes things are missed, and the QA doesn't catch it because there's such mass doing of it. So some people just based on what data is missing. Which is, it's not always consistent across different tests. Some people would probably opt to do additional testing because not all the qualities of the genes and not all the pages in the books are going to be there with that data. Hmm. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was perusing a little bit of the questions here, and Judy had asked about like DNA 360 premium. How do you add
Hmm.
on the extra testing if you've already ordered the regular DNA 360 test? Well, this is where I want to clarify between the different tests. So, our DNA 360 test is our standard foundational DNA test. It's not a DNA 360 test and a DNA 360 premium. Where the premium came in was in the gut 360 premium. Okay, so that's a microbiome test or our DNA gene Premium. That is the test that we have for your biological aging, the cellular health. Yes, it looks at DNA, but not in the same way as DNA 360. What it looks at DNA methylation patterns that I had mentioned before, like that DNA silencing and all that other wonderful stuff. But it looks at DNA in a different way that correlates to, again, cellular or biological aging. So just some clarity on the particular testing names or test names. And I know that a couple of these others I would toss over to you to answer.
Yeah. So Barb is asking, does the Gut 360 need to be registered through Jonah? So when you get your Gut 360 Premium, there will be a card, including a QR code that you can scan in order to get to websites to register. And we are partnered with Jonah. So yes, you will be redirected to a page that is ours, exclusive to us, but is in partnership with Jonah. The next question that I see here is in regards, Sheila, maybe, in regards to oxalates. Sheila, at present, we do not have genes or SNPs that look into oxalates, but maybe in the future. The last question that I have here, I think, is from Judy. Um, how do we get an explanation or translation of what the report says? Our reports right now are only offered in English. We are looking to translate into other languages. So it depends on the language and it depends if we have a practitioner that speaks that language. We might be able to help you out there. But if you're really looking to enliven the report in particular, understand how it is against your life and how you can action it against specific health goals you have, I'd really encourage you to reach out to us. You can explore different programs that we have. We do have programs that are set up where a provider will quite literally take your health history and then walk you through your report so that you can see how your genes are currently enlivened within your health and then which ones you can very specifically leverage to keep improving your health. Um,
Yeah, and I do want to mention that it doesn't matter what time of day that you take your DNA 360 sample, your genes aren't going to be changing. I mean, obviously, you
mhm,
don't want to have just eaten food or drank something because that can affect and actually pick up the genetic profile of the food you ate, if there's any residual. So obviously, you don't want that. So it has to be where
mm,
it's easier in the beginning. You're in the morning before you eat or drink anything. I mean, but it's not a matter of, oh, it's the time of day, because your genes
mhm,
are the same from the time that, you know, egg and sperm, that you
yeah,
are conceived to the time that you die, your DNA is the same. Okay.
mhm,
So that really doesn't matter. So I did want some clarity on that.
yeah. All right, audience. I think that brings us happily to our conclusion. So I hope for our new friends as well as our returning friends that we were really able to explain the power and the evolution of functional genetics, in particular how it's very beautifully being advocated by many of you. I would offer to come into clinic spaces. It's often members of our audience that are bringing our testing to their providers and being like, "Hey, this is kind of easy. Can we talk about it so that we can really incorporate it into our health care and health planning?" So, thank you to those that are in the audience. We hope, I know Dr. Varden is such a gem and has the best examples ready. So, thank you for helping translate all of this to our audience. And, audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about yourselves and thank you for being curious. Yeah. All right, Dr.
And
Varden.
thank you for hosting and for the conversation and for the great
Mhm.
information. Really
Yeah.
appreciate